So this is going to be something a bit different from my usual videos on this channel, but after listening to SiriusXM NASCAR Radio's The Morning Drive on my, morning drive to work on Tuesday, I had to come on here and offer up a rebuttal to what Pete Pistone and, to a lesser extent, Mike Bagley said in their Tuesday takeaways. The subject in question was the NASCAR playoff format. If you want to listen to the full segment, I've got a link to an unlisted YouTube video in the description. You can go check it out there. Now, if you've been following this channel long enough, I'm pretty sure you know where I stand on this subject. I also already knew where Pete stands, but after hearing what he had to say this morning in particular, I felt strongly enough that I wanted to offer up a response. And so for the purposes of this video, I will be doing just that in what I hope is a fair-minded, logical, and respectful manner. And let me also make one thing very clear before we get started. I have a great amount of respect for both Pete Pistone and Mike Bagley. They've both been around NASCAR longer than I've even been alive, and they've accomplished more than I could ever dream to contribute to this great sport. They have certainly earned the right to voice their opinions, and I respect their opinions so long as they offer that same respect to me. That being said, they are not above criticism. I don't believe anybody is, and I believe I am well within my own rights to offer a rebuttal to some of the things that they've said on their show. But I hope that at the end of the day, we can still disagree without being disagreeable, and whatever your own take is on this system, especially if you're in favor of it, I'd love to hear it. I would encourage you to make your case either way in the comments of this video. But first, let's hear from Pete Pistone.
And the two things that I take away, one is when people still say to me, stop talking about playoffs in NASCAR because they don't belong in NASCAR. Will you please get off of that? We've had a playoff in NASCAR for nearly 20 years in one way, shape, or form. So I'm being honest about this. If you're still clinging on to how we used to do it, you have to move on. You need to maybe get to a group and kind of work your way through that because they're not going anywhere, nor should they.
So to be honest, that one line alone is my biggest issue out of everything from Tuesday morning's show. And it's stuff like this that leaves me unconvinced sometimes that the respect I'm offering to the opposition here is being shown in return. With all due respect, Pete, I'm not going to seek out a group or some sort of therapy to get over myself because doing so would force me to compromise my values, my beliefs, and my convictions. I believe in the validity of a full season championship format, and as much as I'm aware that we are almost certainly never going back to that, that's not going to stop me from being critical of the system's existence and offering up my honest opinions on why I believe it's filled with inherent flaws.
So it brings me to a story that Matt Weaver wrote for Sportsnaut, and he talked with Parker Kligerman. Now, Parker on Saturday got eliminated from the Xfinity Series playoffs, right? So this is from a driver who got eliminated from the playoffs. I just want to read you the quote about what Parker Kligerman said about the playoffs. He says, "I love it. I don't even call it pressure. It's just awesome. It's cool that you show up to the racetrack and every lap matters, every bit of preparation during the week. Everyone is at a heightened level of concentration and energy level because everything matters. I just love that going into each of these races and feeling like I have to be perfect." That's from the guy that got eliminated on Saturday.
Again, all due respect to Parker Kligerman, he's accomplished a great deal in this sport and he's certainly entitled to his opinions as well. But I can also point you to a couple of other drivers' opinions that may suggest this is not a unanimous feeling within the garage. Remember in 2020 when Kevin Harvick put together one of the most dominant seasons ever, then was eliminated from the playoffs and said this.
The championship is kind of a bonus. It'd be great to win it, obviously, but I'd rather go through the year and win races and do the things that we did and just came up short.
And what about in 2015 when Denny Hamlin dropped this famous line on Radioactive?
I just can't get over what this series has come to, just how up it is. How do you really crown a real champion now? Just the wild, wild west.
When two future Hall of Famers are calling the championship a mere bonus and openly wondering how do you even crown a real champion now, is that not a questionable look at best for the system that we're using?
Without the playoff implications on Sunday, quite honestly, that race at the Roval, and it's going to happen over the course of 36, I get it. I didn't feel like there was a ton going on.
Pete, you co-host a radio show. It is literally your job to find things to talk about. There are stories all throughout the 38 entries in an Xfinity field. It's not just the playoff drivers like Parker Kligerman. There are others out there who are working just as hard to put in good races and get good results. And quite honestly, if you can't look up and down the grid and find those teams and tell those stories, you're not doing your job well enough. So I can't say I'm convinced by this argument that, oh, well, you can't deny it gives us something to talk about. There are 38 stories to talk about on a weekly basis. So I don't think it's impossible or even hard to find those stories and fill your showtime with them, whether we have the assistance of playoffs or not.
They were strung out. Thank God the stage breaks were back. Sam, to your point, your text over the weekend, I couldn't agree with you more.
So at least we're consistent in our disagreements, but let's talk about this for a second as well, because this is honestly the exact same philosophy. My disdain for stage racing is largely the same reason as my disdain for the playoffs. As Carl Edwards once said,
is it everyone in this room, is it your understanding that when they throw the green flag, right, that the only reason another flag is going to come out, like a yellow one or a red one, before that checkered flag comes out, if there's a condition on the racetrack that is unsafe to continue the race? Is that what everybody understands? If we start getting away from that and we say, okay, halfway through the race, we're going to throw a caution, we're all going to line back up. Well, now it's 2 races, where the first race doesn't even matter. You know, now you just got a shorter race. The lead in basketball is a figurative one. It's a score. So it's as if you stop the quarter in basketball and then you even the score. In racing, I go out there and I gain an advantage. Maybe not this track, but at most tracks, I gain a big advantage. That caution erases that advantage. It's my opinion, my humble opinion. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but it's my opinion that takes something away from the sport.
Now let's apply that philosophy to the playoff system. A driver goes out over the first round and gains an advantage over those 3 races. But as soon as they do so, the points are reset. And that advantage, aside from their playoff points, is almost entirely wiped away. There's no necessity for stage cautions, clearly, since most road course races this year didn't have them, just as there's no necessity for a points reset, clearly, since the first 55 years of NASCAR didn't have them. And it's my opinion that both of these things cheapen the value of race-long consistency and season-long consistency, respectively.
But the idea that motorsports shouldn't have playoffs, to me, is such a foreign idea. Why? Where's it written? Who said that? Where did that decree come from? Why should motorsports not have playoffs? There's no reason not to have it.
I've already made my case in a half-hour video, so I won't repeat everything here, but in simplest terms, this is where I stand. When every driver is competing at the same track at the same time on the same weekend, playoffs or head-to-head matches aren't a necessity to determine who the better team is in the same way they're a necessity in the NFL. There's no decree that states that motorsports, quote-unquote, shouldn't have playoffs, but you cannot look at every other motorsports series out there, plus the first 55 years of NASCAR history and even longer in Xfinity and trucks, and tell me they're a necessity for determining our sports champions.
And you don't tell me about, all you're doing is manufacturing drama and all these other scenarios. Yeah, you're supposed to have drama in sports. It's not manufactured.
Pete, again, with all due respect, it is by definition manufactured. You are unnecessarily bringing the point standings closer together than equaling the final 4 drivers going into the last race. How is that not manufacturing drama and excitement, when that's exactly what the system guarantees every year?
Every team, every driver, every organization has the same rules to play by, right? The same rules to play by. It's not different for anybody.
Yes, it is the same for everybody, and that's why I don't discredit the drivers who win championships under this format. At the end of the day, it all comes down to what we think a champion should be, but we'll save that for a little bit later.
My takeaway from your takeaway would be, name me a professional sport that doesn't have some sort of a playoff.
IndyCar, Formula One, MotoGP, ARCA, which is sanctioned by NASCAR, and if you really need a stick and ball sport, I'll point you to soccer and give you the English Premier League.
When this was on the drawing board, the conversation included a discussion about, well, why don't we do something because everybody else is doing it? Everybody else is doing the playoffs. Every stick and ball sport has them. Why shouldn't we have one?
Because we're not a stick and ball sport. Again, all of our teams compete against each other every single week. The Super Bowl doesn't feature the other 30 NFL teams running scrimmages on the field and interfering with the 2 championship contenders. That analogy, I believe, is deeply flawed, because the sports are so inherently different. And this brings me to a larger point that my good friend Hunter Miller brought up a few years ago. Why are we comparing ourselves to stick and ball sports instead of other motorsports series? Isn't the latter a more direct comparison?
I don't understand the hand-wringing. Like why after 19 years is this an issue, right? In here, it's not like it's been 19 days or 19 months. It's been 19 years. Why all of a sudden do we come back to this, and why do we always circle back. Playoffs got to go.
I don't know if this is so much a 19 years thing. I remember even as a kid that there were fans that didn't like the original chase format. So I do think there's always been some opposition, whether it's been 19 days, months, or years.
The tallying up of points from the point system from 1972 is an incredible waste of time. If that satisfies whatever you have for that, that's fine. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not, can't use it for anything except to say, well, if we were doing this the way we were doing it back when Bob Latford wrote this thing up on a napkin in 1972, this would be your champion.
So I will give Mike some credit here, and this may surprise some of you, but I don't entirely disagree. It's fun to look at and play a NASCAR fantasy game, so to speak, but if the system was different or wasn't in place at all, the race results would absolutely also be different, and therefore the points would be different as well. There are instances where I'm not sure they'd be different enough to entirely sway the outcomes of dominant enough seasons, such as Kevin Harvick in 2020, but you are correct in saying that they wouldn't exactly be the same. So yes, in some ways, it is a waste of time.
It's all about what you want to chase, man. I mean, if you're looking at the hood pins, you're chasing things year to year. If you're looking a mile down the road, you're looking for a longer term situation to where you're not changing this, changing that to suit the whims of the moment and to suit the needs or desires of the moment. To me, when you establish a playoff format, it should be a longer term, not just to quench the immediate thirst of those that have it.
What exactly have we been doing for the last 20 years? We started with a 10-race reset with 10 drivers. 3 years later, we upped it to 12. 4 years later, we introduced wild cards. 2 years later, we put an extra driver in the chase solely because of MWR's team orders. Then we introduced an elimination-style chase and expanded the field to 16. Then 3 years later, we added playoff and stage points to the equation. The fact that we've gone 7 years without changing it is actually kind of unprecedented. So why are we so surprised that there are a lot of fans out there asking for change? We'd kind of gotten used to that post-2003.
You're not just running through the calendar to get to the end of the year, well, like we had in ARCA, where Jesse Love had things wrapped up 2 weeks before the season ended. That's not Jesse Love's fault. That's just the way that system is. I particularly don't care for that system. That all you had to do was take the green flag at, Toledo, and it was over, right? Mm-hmm. This makes people have to perform.
Yes, all Jesse Love had to do was take the green flag at Salem. The finale was at Toledo, so I guess it's understandable why Pete might have gotten those two mixed up. But here's the thing. Nobody is questioning the validity of Jesse Love's championship. He was far and away the best and most dominant ARCA driver this season. And this brings me to the main question and takeaway. What is the point of crowning a champion in sports? My answer would be to commemorate the best team over the course of the full season. And a system that culminates in a one-race winner-take-all finale far from guarantees that outcome. Tyler Reddick in 2018 was the third best driver on his own junior motorsports team over the course of the full season, but because he made it to the Final Four and won Homestead, he's crowned the champion of the full season. Matt Crafton didn't win a race all year in 2019 and hadn't even so much as had a top 5 since the beginning of the summer going into Homestead, but he still came away with the title. And again, no disrespect to either of them, they did what they had to do with the system they were given, but can you really make the argument that they were the best in their series over the course of a season in the same way that Jesse Love was in ARCA this year? Or that Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen have been when they've won their F1 championships? Now, if your philosophy or answer to the question of what a champion should be is different, then that's fine. Maybe you think the driver who wins the last race of the year should be the champion by default because that's when winning should matter the absolute most. There's nothing wrong with holding that opinion. All I can do is defend my right to agree to disagree and back up my own beliefs with my own arguments.
So without the playoffs, I think NASCAR would be missing a lot of things right now. And for me, the playoff format could probably never be perfect, but it's good, and I'm glad we got it.
Agreeing to disagree is exactly what we'll have to continue to do here on this subject.
I think that the more change you have, you run the risk of driving more people away because they can't keep up with all the changes than you do staying put and not changing as much to satisfy the whims of the moment.
Again, just take a look at the ratings the last 20 years during all that change and how far they've tanked. You might think now that we've been stable for a few years, maybe they've gone back up, but the evidence suggests that's not necessarily been the case. If anything, they've only continued to dip a bit. Now, I know there are a lot of contributing factors to the ratings being in decline, but I don't really know how you can use those declining TV ratings as a pro-playoff argument. I'm just not seeing it.
Do you know a 19-year-old fan today of NASCAR knows no different than just that the fact that there have always been a playoff in his lifetime?
Yeah, isn't that something?
Okay. That's 20 years, which is, it gets me back to this whole legacy fan versus the newer fan. And the legacy fan certainly has a stake in this, and God bless you. But you're not the be-all, end-all. And that's why I think sometimes this sport goes a little too far back in the day to appease those people. Finding that balance, I know it's not easy by any means. But again, I get a little tired of that whole territorialism from the fans who go, well, I've been a fan for 40 years. Okay, fine. That kid's been a fan for 20 years. Why shouldn't he matter too?
I am 24 years old and started watching this sport at the tail end of the 2006 season. I wasn't around, or at least wasn't following the sport, before the introduction of some sort of NASCAR postseason system. Yet here I am, having just made the case against it. Don't assume that every new and or young fan is in favor of the playoffs, just as you shouldn't assume that every so-called legacy fan is against them.
I've been here forever. This is by far the best playoff championship format that I can remember.
What did I just say? Pete is a legacy fan and a playoff defender. I'm a younger fan who's against them. I don't think we should be making a blanket statement on behalf of the legacy fan and the newer fan in terms of what they want. If there's one thing everybody should be able to agree on, it's that you can't please everyone.
You want to see people go through the motions? I don't. I want them to know that any mistake they make might cost them a championship. And guess what? It happens. If a part breaks on your race car and you wind up getting knocked out of the playoffs, that's not the playoffs' fault. That's life. That's sports.
Again, Pete, I'm sorry, but it is by definition the playoffs' fault. In a non-playoff system, Kevin Harvick almost certainly wins the 2020 championship easily. But in a playoff system, a mediocre round of 8 culminating in a last-lap spin at Martinsville costs him the championship. Now, that may very well be Harvick's fault in some respects, or Stewart-Haas Racing's fault, but the fault here doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Harvick's failure not just to win the championship, but to not so much as even make the championship 4 in an otherwise such dominant year exposes a fault in that system.
I remember Rick Wren when he and Hornaday went to Homestead to try to win the title, and they didn't win it, and everybody was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this race kept you from winning the championship. Rick says, no, it didn't. It's the races leading up to this that cost us the championship. This was the final straw. But us losing the championship started when we gave up this here, when we got wrecked there, when we made a mistake here, and all that adds up.
You know, it's almost as if you don't need a playoff system to make every lap matter. Just as Ron Hornaday found out in 2008, which just so happened to be 8 years before the playoffs were introduced to the Truck Series.